Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the suffocating heat of a New England summer. The year is 1892. The place, Fall River, Massachusetts, a sprawling industrial city built on the sweat and toil of its textile mills, where the air hung thick with humidity and the murmur of societal expectations. It was an era of strict Victorian morality, where appearances were everything, and the dark undercurrents of human nature were meticulously swept beneath pristine parlor rugs.
And it was into this world, this simmering pot of gaslight and rigid propriety, that the Borden family was both an embodiment and an anomaly. Andrew Borden, a man of formidable will and even more formidable wealth, had clawed his way from humble beginnings to become one of Fall River's most prominent and notoriously parsimonious citizens. His second wife, Abby, was a woman whose presence felt perpetually overshadowed, caught between Andrew's iron grip and the resentful gaze of his two adult daughters from his first marriage. Then there were the daughters themselves. Emma, the elder, a quiet shadow, always loyal, always present. And Lizzie, Lizzie, a woman of 32, unmarried, independent-minded, yet still living under her father's thumb. Lizzie, with her church-going piety and her alleged penchant for shoplifting, her charity work and her outbursts of temper, she was a paradox, a walking contradiction in a corset, a woman whose true nature seemed as elusive as smoke. The Borden house at 92 2nd Street was not just a home, it was a gilded cage, brimming with unspoken resentments, simmering disputes over property, and a quiet, oppressive tension that thickened with every passing year.
Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the suffocating heat of a New England summer. The year is 1892. The place, Fall River, Massachusetts, a sprawling industrial city built on the sweat and toil of its textile mills, where the air hung thick with humidity and the murmur of societal expectations. It was an era of strict Victorian morality, where appearances were everything, and the dark undercurrents of human nature were meticulously swept beneath pristine parlor rugs.
Was it an unknown intruder? A phantom killer who vanished into the sweltering August air? Or was it someone far closer? Someone within the very fabric of that seemingly respectable Victorian home? The very idea that a woman, a well-bred woman, could commit such a monstrous act was so unfathomable, so disturbing to the sensibilities of the age, that it became an obsession, a dark fairy tale, a psychological puzzle. The case of Lizzie Borden wasn't just a crime. It was a seismic shock that exposed the cracks in society's facade, revealing the capacity for darkness beneath the veneer of civility.
August 4th, 1892, Fall River, Massachusetts, a stifling summer morning, heavy and still, promising routine. For the prominent Borden family, residents of a respectable home on 2nd Street, it began like any other Thursday. Andrew Jackson Borden, a wealthy, respected, yet notoriously frugal businessman, was at home. His second wife, Abby, was upstairs. Their maid, Bridget Sullivan, was outside. And then there was Lizzie. Lizzie Borden, Andrew's younger daughter, claimed she was in the barn. A seemingly mundane tableau, a quintessential snapshot of American domesticity. But in moments, this ordinary scene would shatter, unveiling a horror that would shock a nation and forever embed itself in the annals of unsolved American crime. It was just before 11 a.m.
Bridget Sullivan, having finished her outdoor chores, was resting in her third-floor room. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing cry ripped through the quiet house. "Bridget, come quick! "Father's dead! Someone has come in and killed him!" Bridget rushed down, her heart pounding. At the foot of the stairs, Lizzie stood, a figure of terror and distress. Bridget followed Lizzie into the sitting room. There, slumped on the sofa, Andrew Borden sat. His face, once stern, was a grotesque ruin. Blow after blow, delivered with unimaginable force, had cleaved through his skull, leaving a bloody, pulpy, unrecognizable mess. His eyes, fixed in a vacant, accusing stare, held his final secrets. The room, usually a sanctuary of Victorian order, was now splattered with crimson, a horrific, abstract painting. The air, heavy with summer, carried the metallic, sickening tang of fresh blood. The sight was beyond comprehension, a nightmare made sickeningly real.
There, slumped on the sofa, Andrew Borden sat. His face, once stern, was a grotesque ruin. Blow after blow, delivered with unimaginable force, had cleaved through his skull, leaving a bloody, pulpy, unrecognizable mess. His eyes, fixed in a vacant, accusing stare, held his final secrets. The room, usually a sanctuary of Victorian order, was now splattered with crimson, a horrific, abstract painting. The air, heavy with summer, carried the metallic, sickening tang of fresh blood. The sight was beyond comprehension, a nightmare made sickeningly real. Panic seized the household. Bridget, reeling, ran to fetch Dr. Bowen, a neighbor. Lizzie, surprisingly composed to some, distraught to others, began calling for help, her voice ringing out through the quiet street. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion and Lizzie's frantic cries, began to gather. The news spread like wildfire. Something unspeakable had happened at the Borden house. Andrew Borden, a pillar of the community, had been brutally murdered. But even in their horror, no one yet grasped the full extent of the nightmare.
As people milled about, a chilling question began to surface. Where is Abby? Lizzie had offered a vague explanation, claiming her stepmother had received a note and gone out. But a nagging dread snaked through the growing crowd. Mrs. Churchill and Miss Alice Russell decided to search the house. Upstairs in the guest bedroom, their worst fears were realized with a scream. There, face down between the bed and a dresser, lay Abby Borden. Her body, already growing cold, was a horrifying testament to the same savage fury that had claimed her husband. Her head, too, had been bludgeoned repeatedly, at least 19 times, a sickening display of pure, unadulterated rage. Her hair, usually coiffed, was now soaked in viscous blood, matted and dark. The sheer, unfathomable brutality of the attack defied all belief. This was not merely murder, it was an act of visceral hatred.
The immediate aftermath was chaos. Neighbors whispered, horrified. Doctors confirmed the grim reality. Soon the police, bewildered and ill-equipped, began their investigation. But from the very first moments, the crime scene was hopelessly compromised. A small army of curious onlookers, well-meaning but untrained, trampled through the house, contaminating vital potential evidence, blurring the lines of what was found. Everyone had a theory, everyone harbored a suspicion, and the devastating lack of a clear suspect, combined with the sheer savagery of the crime, created an immediate, impenetrable fog of mystery that would haunt the case for generations. Who could have committed such an atrocity, and why?
Imagine a quiet, respectable New England town, steeped in rigid Victorian morality, where life unfolded with predictable decorum. Now, envision that tranquility shattering, not by a shadowy intruder from the outside, but by an unspeakable horror born within the very walls of a prominent family home. This is the story of Lizzie Borden, a name forever etched into the annals of American crime.
not merely for the brutal double murder of her father and stepmother, but for the chilling, enduring question that has haunted generations. Could she have wielded the axe?
Fall River, Massachusetts, 1892. A city humming with the industry of textile mills. A place where ambition and prosperity thrived, yet where social standing and propriety were paramount. At its heart stood a grand, if somewhat austere house at 92 2nd Street. Here resided Andrew Jackson Borden, a man of formidable wealth, a self-made patriarch whose shrewd, often ruthless business dealings had amassed a substantial fortune. He was, however, notoriously parsimonious, a trait that grated on those around him. His second wife, Abby Durfee Gray Borden, a woman of comfortable build and outwardly gentle disposition, was a constant, if often overlooked, presence. But the true enigma of this household, the figure around whom the storm would ultimately rage, was his younger daughter, Lizzie Andrew Borden.
Lizzie, at 32, was far from the demure, pliable woman society expected. She was a Sunday school teacher, an active member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, an outwardly pious figure who volunteered for charitable causes and hosted social events. By all appearances, she was the quintessential Victorian lady, poised, respectable, above reproach. Yet, beneath that meticulously constructed facade lay a complex tapestry of desires, frustrations, and unspoken resentments. Lizzie felt stifled, trapped within a home that offered material comfort but denied her emotional freedom and financial autonomy. The chasm between her outward conformity and her inner turmoil was growing, a silent pressure cooker threatening to explode.
The Borden home, despite its material splendor, was a cauldron of simmering tensions. Andrew Borden's iron-fisted control over his vast fortune fueled deep-seated grievances. He had recently begun transferring valuable properties to Abby, a move that only intensified the daughter's fears that their inheritance was being siphoned away. Lizzie, in particular, chafed under her father's strictures and her stepmother's quiet, yet pervasive authority. The relationship between Lizzie and Abby was, at best, a frigid truce. Lizzie rarely addressed Abby as mother, a telling sign of the emotional distance and deep-seated animosity. Disputes over money, over property, over perceived favoritism towards Abby's relatives, these were not mere petty squabbles. They were deep, festering wounds in the family psyche, poisoning the atmosphere with an almost palpable resentment. The yearning for independence, for an escape from the suffocating control of her father and the perceived threat of her stepmother, must have become an intoxicating, dangerous allure.
Then came that sweltering August morning, the 4th of August, 1892, a day that began with the mundane rhythm of a Victorian household, but ended in an explosion of unspeakable horror. Andrew Borden, found first, brutally hacked to death while napping on the sofa, his face almost unrecognizable. Hours later, Abby Borden, discovered upstairs, her body similarly savaged by no less than 19 blows from an axe. 2 lives extinguished with shocking ferocity in broad daylight within the confines of their supposedly safe home. The immediate question screamed across Fall River, reverberating through every hushed conversation. Who could have committed such a monstrous act? Robbery was quickly ruled out. Nothing of significant value was taken. There were no signs of forced entry. The killer, it seemed, was someone known to the household. And as the initial shock gave way to grim investigation, an unimaginable, scandalous truth began to crystallize, slowly, terrifyingly, pointing towards the unthinkable.
From the very outset, Lizzie's behavior raised eyebrows, then alarms. Her apparent calmness in the face of such horror, a demeanor some found chillingly detached, starkly contrasted with the chaos around her. Her statements to police were vague, often contradictory, and seemed to shift with each retelling. There was the peculiar detail of her burning a dress, which she claimed was stained with paint, but which some suspected might have held a far more sinister mark. She was the one who discovered her father. Yet her account of her movements that morning seemed almost too convenient, placing her just out of sight, just out of earshot during the estimated time of both murders. She claimed to have been in the barn, then in the loft, then elsewhere. It was almost too perfectly ambiguous, too neatly inexplicable. And as the town began to whisper, the cold, accusable finger of suspicion, initially hesitant and almost apologetic, began to point directly at the respectable, church-going Lizzie Borden.
The very notion was an affront to Victorian sensibilities, an unthinkable breach of decorum. A woman? A lady of means and social standing, to wield an axe with such primal, savage brutality? It defied every societal expectation, shattered every comforting illusion. Women in that era were portrayed as fragile, delicate, incapable of such raw, untamed violence. Yet the evidence, circumstantial and perplexing as it was, seemed to coalesce around her, creating an undeniable gravitational pull of suspicion. The sheer audacity of the crime, combined with the perpetrator's apparent invisibility, forced a horrifying reevaluation of what a respectable woman might truly be capable of. Was it a sudden, uncontrollable outburst born of years of suppressed rage? A meticulously planned act of liberation from a life she despised? Or was Lizzie merely a convenient scapegoat, an easy target for a community grappling with an unthinkable crime, unable to conceive of a stranger committing such an intimate act of violence? This wasn't just a murder. It was a psychological earthquake, shaking the very foundations of polite society and forcing it to confront the darkness that could lurk behind the most demure of smiles. The whispers grew into a deafening roar. The town, the nation, became utterly obsessed with the riddle of Lizzie Borden. How could this gentle, pious woman, this pillar of her community, be capable of such barbarity? Or was she, in fact, a tragic victim of circumstance, ensnared in a web of suspicion woven by a lack of other viable suspects and her own bewildering, often contradictory conduct? The official investigation, and later the sensational trial, would attempt to pierce the veil of Lizzie's composure, to find the cracks in her narrative, to reconcile the image of the respectable daughter with the horrifying reality of the crime. But even as the legal drama unfolded, the questions multiplied, forming a labyrinth of doubt and intrigue that would forever cement Lizzie Borden as one of America's most enduring and perhaps most misunderstood cold case figures. Her shadow had emerged, long and chilling, cast across the bloody landscape of her family home, and it would never truly recede, a permanent fixture in the darkest corners of American true crime lore. The screams had barely faded, the last echo of horror still clinging to the humid August air when the first responders breached the threshold of 92 2nd Street. What they found was a scene of unspeakable savagery, but what they did next would forever shackle this case in the chains of conjecture and controversy. In the nascent days of forensic science, the concept of a preserved crime scene was more a theoretical ideal than a practical reality. And so, the immediate aftermath of the Borden murders devolved into a chaotic spectacle,
less an investigation and more a haphazard scramble. Neighbors, well-meaning but utterly destructive, poured into the house, their shocked footsteps trampling potential evidence into the very fibers of the rugs. Curious onlookers jostled for a peek, their breath clouding windows that might have held vital clues. Items were touched, moved, even removed, all before proper documentation could begin. The very ground on which the truth might have stood was irrevocably churned into mud. The primitive methods of the era meant no fingerprint dusting, no meticulous collection of trace evidence, no secure perimeter. It was a free-for-all, a tragic comedy of errors that doomed the investigation from its very first frantic moments. The public's insatiable hunger for details, combined with the authorities' unfamiliarity with managing such a horrific domestic crime, turned the Borden home into a macabre open house.
Amidst the gory tableau, one vital piece of the puzzle seemed to vanish into thin air: the murder weapon. Initial frantic searches yielded nothing. A blood-soaked axe, the presumed instrument of such brutal, close-quarters violence, was simply gone. Its absence screamed volumes, a silent, chilling accusation hanging heavy in the stifling air of the Borden home. But then, days later, as suspicion began to coalesce like a dark cloud over Lizzie Borden, a hatchet was discovered in the cellar. Not just any hatchet, but one with its handle inexplicably broken, its head curiously clean. It was a discovery that fueled more questions than answers. Had it been cleaned? Broken deliberately to obscure a connection? Or was it merely an old, discarded tool, coincidentally found at a time of desperate searching? This ambiguity was a poison, seeping into the public consciousness, tainting every subsequent revelation, making every fact feel like a carefully orchestrated deception. The very weapon meant to bring clarity only deepened the enigma.
Lizzie's own demeanor, observed under the relentless scrutiny of a horrified town and an insatiable press, did little to quell the rising tide of suspicion. Her erratic behavior, from the seemingly detached statements immediately after the discovery to a peculiar, almost theatrical fainting spell, was dissected, analyzed, and ultimately demonized. A woman of her social standing, a Sunday school teacher, was expected to exhibit a certain decorum, even in grief. Lizzie's reactions, however, often veered into the unpredictable, feeding the growing narrative of her strangeness, her unnatural composure, or conversely, her exaggerated emotional displays. Her changing accounts of her whereabouts on that fateful morning, her inconsistent answers regarding her relationship with her stepmother, Abby, and perhaps most damningly, the alleged burning of a dress in the kitchen stove days later, a dress she claimed was stained with paint, not blood, all contributed to a narrative of guilt forming in the public mind. This act, witnessed by Bridget Sullivan, became a cornerstone of suspicion. Why burn a dress, innocent or not, when under such intense police scrutiny? Was it the grief-stricken fumbling of an innocent woman under immense pressure, her mind reeling from shock and trauma, her actions misinterpreted by a sensationalist world? Or the cunning manipulations of a cold-blooded killer attempting to erase the last vestiges of her heinous act? The newspapers, ravenous for sensationalism and a ready-made villain, had already decided. Lizzie Borden, the quiet Sunday school teacher, was rapidly transforming into a monstrous figure, the embodiment of an unthinkable crime committed within the supposed sanctity of a Victorian home.
Despite the fervent belief in her guilt that took root in Fall River, the actual evidence against Lizzie was, to put it mildly, flimsy. There were no eyewitnesses to the murders themselves. The nascent science of fingerprinting was not yet sophisticated enough to definitively link her to the weapon or the scene, and even if it had been, the initial chaos had likely obliterated any such prints. The blood evidence, or frustrating lack thereof, on her clothing was inconclusive. easily explained away by her defenders. The prosecution's case rested heavily on circumstantial details: the absence of a clear forced entry, the perceived lack of an alternative suspect, and above all, Lizzie's peculiar and contradictory behavior. It was a case built on whispers and public outcry, a house of cards perpetually teetering on the brink of collapse, yet held aloft by the sheer weight of societal horror and suspicion. The very air of Fall River became thick with rumors, each more lurid than the last. Whispers of family feuds, secret wills, and an inheritance motive ran rampant, amplified by the penny dreadfuls and sensationalist headlines that devoured every scrap of information, real or imagined. Bridget Sullivan, the Borden's maid, offered her own muddled testimony, often contradicting herself, perhaps out of genuine confusion, the trauma of witnessing the aftermath, or even a desperate desire to protect her own position, or indeed Lizzie herself. Her statements only added to the frustrating labyrinth of facts and falsehoods. Even the timeline itself became a battleground of conflicting accounts, with every minute of that sweltering August morning picked apart and reassembled, only to fall apart again under cross-examination. Who was where, when? What did they see, or fail to see? The conflicting narratives created a dizzying maze, trapping the truth somewhere within its impenetrable walls. Every question answered seemed to birth two more, feeding the insatiable beast of public curiosity and suspicion, ensuring that no definitive picture could ever truly emerge. In the end, the initial investigation, hampered by the primitive forensic techniques of the era, the sheer human panic of the moment, and the overwhelming public intrusion, succeeded only in clouding the waters further. The scene was compromised, vital clues potentially lost forever in the chaos, and the focus, almost inevitably, narrowed to the most convenient and sensational suspect, the daughter who was present, whose behavior defied conventional expectations. Lizzie Borden, once a respectable figure, now stood accused not just by the law, but by an entire nation captivated by a horror that defied easy explanation and demanded a villain. The stage was set for a trial, but the truth, shrouded in a fog of fear, rumor, and mishandling, seemed further away than ever, leaving a legacy of unanswered questions that would echo through the decades.
The air in the courtroom was a living, breathing entity, thick with anticipation, fear, and a burning hunger for justice. After weeks, perhaps months of gripping testimony, of lives laid bare and secrets unearthed, the stage was finally set for the climax of a drama that had seized the nation's soul, the trial of the century. From the moment the judge's gavel cracked, echoing through the hushed chamber, every eye in that packed room and, indeed, across the country glued to their radios and newspaper headlines was fixed on the figures at the heart of this unparalleled spectacle. This wasn't merely a legal proceeding. It was a public reckoning, a battle for truth waged under the unblinking gaze of a society desperate for answers. Every detail, from the somber suits of the attorneys to the nervous fidgeting of the defendant, was scrutinized, dissected, and debated. The weight of history pressed down on every participant, an invisible burden that made each word, each gesture, resonate with profound significance. This was where the narratives collided, where the abstract pursuit of justice became a tangible, high-stakes game of persuasion. The very foundations of the American legal system were on display, under pressure, revealing both its strengths and its inherent vulnerabilities. The courtroom, usually a place of solemn procedure, transformed into a gladiatorial arena where reputations were forged and shattered, where the fate of an individual was woven into the larger tapestry of public morality and collective belief. It was a crucible designed to test the limits of evidence, the power of rhetoric, and the ultimate agonizing responsibility of human judgment. The tension wasn't just palpable, it was suffocating,
a silent scream that permeated every corner of the room, promising either catharsis or an even deeper, more unsettling uncertainty. The nation collectively held its breath, awaiting the ultimate declaration that would forever mark this chapter in history. Every morning, as the doors swung open, a fresh wave of frenzied reporters, sketch artists, and curious onlookers surged forward, eager to claim their vantage point for the day's unfolding drama. The media circus was relentless, each headline screaming a new development, each broadcast amplifying the smallest gesture or perceived shift in momentum. Public opinion, a fickle beast, swayed wildly with every witness, every cross-examination, adding an external pressure that no legal team could ever fully insulate themselves from. This was a trial by media as much as by jury, a dual battle fought on the legal battlefield and within the court of public perception.
The immense pressure bore down on everyone, particularly the lawyers, who were not just advocating for their client, but performing for an entire nation. Their careers, their reputations, even their legacies hung in the balance, inextricably linked to the outcome of this monumental legal clash. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of unspoken anxieties. It was an environment designed to wear down even the most resolute, to strip away pretense and reveal the raw human core beneath. This intensity was a constant, a relentless drumbeat underscoring every word spoken, every piece of evidence presented, every moment of silence that stretched into infinity. It was the price of a trial of this magnitude, the unavoidable consequence of a case that had transcended mere crime and become a national obsession. The stakes were impossibly high, and everyone present, from the stoic judge to the nervous defendant, felt the crushing weight of history bearing down. The expectation for a definitive resolution, for justice to be unequivocally served, was overwhelming, making the pursuit of truth a journey fraught with peril and profound consequence. This wasn't just about proving guilt or innocence, it was about reaffirming the very principles of order in a world momentarily thrown into disarray. The world watched, waited, and judged, making this more than just a trial. It was a societal referendum. The weight of that collective gaze was an almost physical presence, a silent, unyielding demand for clarity in the face of chaos. It was within this cauldron of public scrutiny and legal maneuvering that the next crucial chapters of the story were written, etched forever into the annals of American legal history.
The prosecution, spearheaded by a team of formidable legal minds, faced an uphill battle from the outset. Their case, while meticulously constructed, rested heavily on the delicate threads of circumstantial evidence. There was no smoking gun, no eyewitness to the crime itself, only a mosaic of fragments, each piece carefully placed, yet always vulnerable to being dislodged. They sought to connect the dots of opportunity, motive, and a forensic trail that, while compelling, often danced on the edge of definitive proof. Weaving together expert testimonies on fiber analysis, ballistics reports, psychological profiles drawn from the shadows of the past, and the meticulously reconstructed timelines of fleeting alibis, they sought to paint a compelling, undeniable picture for the jury. Each stain, every fiber, every hushed phone call, every fleeting encounter became a crucial pillar in their edifice of accusation. They brought forth witnesses whose accounts, though individually small, collectively pointed towards the defendant. Detectives testified to the grueling hours spent tracking leads, the frustration of dead ends, and the chilling patterns they believed emerged from the chaos. Forensic scientists presented their findings with an air of detached authority, turning microscopic particles into damning clues. The prosecutors, with unwavering conviction, laid out their narrative of a calculated act, presenting a logical progression of events that, they argued, could only lead to one conclusion: the defendant's guilt. Yet doubt lingered like a persistent fog, threatening to obscure their carefully crafted narrative. The defense, sharp-edged and relentless, waited for every opportunity to exploit these inherent vulnerabilities, to unravel each thread until the entire tapestry of guilt began to fray. They knew that a single inconsistency, a lone unanswered question, could be enough to shatter the prosecution's carefully constructed world. This vulnerability became the very target of their calculated assault. The prosecution's final summation was a powerful, emotional appeal, weaving together every piece of evidence into a tapestry of undeniable culpability, urging the jury to see the truth they believed was so clear. Then came the defense, a force of nature armed with skepticism and an unwavering belief in the cornerstone of American justice, the presumption of innocence. Led by a charismatic legal titan, their strategy was not to prove an alternative truth, but to systematically dismantle the prosecutions. With incisive cross-examinations, they cast shadows of doubt upon every witness, every piece of evidence. They relentlessly attacked the validity of forensic techniques, suggesting human error or contamination. They highlighted the inconsistencies in witness testimonies, the gaps in the timeline, and the inherent subjectivity of circumstantial evidence. Motives were questioned, timelines scrutinized, and the very integrity of the investigation brought under intense fire. The defense lawyers, with their booming voices and theatrical flair, painted a picture not of guilt, but of flawed assumptions, of overzealous pursuit, of the tragic possibility that a community, desperate for answers, had fixed its gaze upon the wrong individual.
They masterfully introduced alternative theories, however remote, and highlighted the multitude of individuals who could just as easily have committed the crime. Every objection was a tactical strike, every argument a powerful appeal to reason, reminding the jury that a reasonable doubt, however small, was enough to set their client free. They presented their own expert witnesses, who challenged the prosecution's science, offering different interpretations of the same data. The defense's narrative was one of a rushed investigation, of tunnel vision, of a public thirst for a scapegoat, and of the fundamental principle that the state must prove its case beyond all reasonable doubt, not merely suggest a possibility. Their closing argument was a tour de force, a passionate and meticulously reasoned plea that resonated with the jury's own inherent doubts and the gravity of their decision. The courtroom became a crucible where the competing narratives clashed, each vying for the hearts and minds of the 12 souls who held the defendant's fate in their hands. The air crackled with the intellectual sparring, the raw emotion, and the profound weight of a justice system put to the ultimate test. It was a testament to the adversarial nature of the legal process, a dramatic display of two powerful forces locked in an epic struggle for truth. Every day was a fresh volley of legal brilliance and calculated deception, a testament to the lengths to which both sides would go to secure victory. The constant clashes, the objections, the fiery exchanges between attorneys created an atmosphere of electrifying tension that made every moment feel critical. The judge, a stoic figure perched above the fray, maintained a delicate balance, his rulings shaping the very contours of the legal landscape. Witnesses, some trembling, others defiant, were paraded before the court, their words becoming the raw material from which truth was meant to be distilled. The cross-examinations were particularly brutal, turning testimonies into battlegrounds where credibility was fiercely contested. One moment, a prosecution witness would deliver a seemingly damning piece of information, only for the defense to systematically dismantle it, leaving a trail of doubt in its wake. The defendant,
a silent, often inscrutable presence, watched it all unfold, their expressions scrutinized by every observer for any hint of emotion, any crack in their composure. Families of the victims sat in the gallery, their faces etched with grief and a desperate hope for closure, their silent suffering a constant reminder of the human cost of the crime. The public gallery was a microcosm of society itself, a diverse mix of the curious, the concerned, and the deeply invested, each with their own preconceived notions and fervent opinions. The drama was not merely in the grand pronouncements, but in the subtle shifts of an eyebrow, the tremor in a voice, the fleeting glance between attorney and client. It was a performance, yes, but one with the highest possible stakes, where every nuance could tip the scales of justice. This daily spectacle was a profound demonstration of the human element in law, a testament to the power of narrative and the fragility of certainty. It was in these intense moments, within the confines of that historic courtroom, that the fate of a nation's justice system seemed to hang, suspended precariously, awaiting its ultimate resolution.
Finally, the jury retreated behind closed doors, and the courtroom, which had hummed with activity for weeks, fell into an eerie, almost unbearable silence. The jury room became its own arena of intense drama, a crucible where 12 ordinary citizens, burdened with an extraordinary responsibility, wrestled with the immense weight of the evidence, the impassioned pleas of both sides, and the clamor of a nation demanding a resolution. The quiet room, once filled with polite introductions, now resonated with hushed arguments, raised voices, and the agonizing silence of contemplation. Each juror brought their own biases, their own interpretations, their own understanding of justice to the table. Some were convinced of guilt, others swayed towards innocence, and a few remained steadfast in their uncertainty. Every exhibit was re-examined, every testimony replayed in their minds. The hours bled into days, fueled by coffee and the gnawing pressure from the world outside. Friendships formed under stress, fractured under disagreement, only to be painstakingly rebuilt in the shared pursuit of truth. They meticulously debated the nuances of intent, the reliability of memory, the very definition of beyond a reasonable doubt. The sanctity of their duty pressed down on them, knowing that a single wrong decision could forever alter lives, uphold a lie, or condemn the innocent. It was a testament to the agonizing, often messy process of collective human judgment, where personal convictions clashed with legal mandates. The discussions were intense, at times heated, as each juror passionately argued their perspective, trying to sway their peers. They meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence, every witness statement, searching for clarity, for that elusive spark of absolute certainty. The pressure to reach a unanimous verdict, or at least a consensus, was immense, not just from the law, but from the expectant world waiting outside their secluded chamber. The longer they deliberated, the more the suspense outside grew, a fever pitch of speculation and anticipation. Every passing hour was a fresh torment for the defendant, for the victims' families, and for a public desperate for an end to the agonizing uncertainty. The tension was almost unbearable, a tangible weight that settled over the entire courthouse. Then, a knock. A note passed to the judge. The jury had reached a verdict. The announcement sent a shockwave through the courtroom, a collective gasp that rippled through the packed benches. The defendant stood, pale and rigid, while the families of the victims gripped each other, their faces a mask of strained expectation. The foreman rose, his voice, though clear, barely audible above the pounding hearts in the room. As the words were spoken, a lifetime of hopes, fears, and unanswered questions culminated in a single, irreversible declaration. The verdict, whatever it may be, would forever echo through history, a final, definitive answer to a question that had haunted a nation. And as the gavel fell one last time, An era ended, but the echoes of the trial of the century would continue to resonate, a permanent testament to the complex, often imperfect pursuit of justice.
Silence, thick and suffocating, descended upon the New Bedford courtroom. Every gaze, every held breath, every anxious heartbeat was fixed on the slight figure of Lizzie Andrew Borden. On June 20, 1893, after mere hours of deliberation, a startlingly brief period given the gruesome nature of the double axe murders, the foreman of the jury uttered the words that would forever fracture America's perception of justice and seal the fate of a woman not behind bars, but within an invisible prison of public condemnation. Not guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by a surge of conflicting emotions. For some, it was a vindication, a testament to the presumption of innocence. For many more, it was an outrage, a grotesque miscarriage of justice that defied all common sense. The legal system had spoken, but the court of public opinion had already delivered its own, unyielding verdict. This was not freedom. It was merely a different kind of confinement. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom. Newspapers screamed headlines of shock and disbelief, their ink barely dry before the public devoured every word, dissecting the proceedings, questioning the jury's wisdom, and solidifying their own deeply entrenched convictions. Lizzie Borden had been acquitted, but the shadow of two brutal murders and the chilling question of who had wielded the axe would cling to her like a shroud for the rest of her days. She was now a pariah, forever branded by a crime she was legally innocent of.
Returning to Fall River was a descent into an unforgiving social purgatory. The city that had once been her home now saw her through a lens of suspicion and fear. Doors that had once been open were now firmly shut. Her former social circles evaporated. The First Congregational Church, where she had been an active member, silently, unequivocally ostracized her. This wasn't merely a polite snubbing. It was a profound, daily isolation, a chilling social death. Lizzie, with a substantial inheritance from the very parents she was accused of murdering, purchased a grand new residence, a stately Victorian mansion on French Street. She named it Maplecroft. It was a deliberate statement, an attempt to assert a new identity, to carve out a life of refinement and social standing. Yet, Maplecroft quickly became a gilded cage. While she furnished it lavishly, filled it with art and an extensive library, and maintained a retinue of servants, the grand facade could not conceal the aching emptiness within. The whispers followed her like an echo.
Children, often cruel in their innocence, chanted the infamous rhyme that had begun to circulate nationwide. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, gave her father 41. This nursery rhyme, a chilling piece of American folklore, etched her name and the crime into the very fabric of popular culture, ensuring that no matter how far she moved, no matter how much she tried to escape, the axe would always hover.
Perhaps the most poignant testament to her isolation came in 1905, when her older sister, Emma, who had stood by her throughout the harrowing trial, abruptly moved out of Maplecroft and never spoke to Lizzie again. The precise reasons for Emma's departure remain shrouded in mystery. Speculation ranges from disagreements over Lizzie's lavish spending and her friendships with actresses to a final unspoken conviction on Emma's part regarding Lizzie's guilt. Whatever the cause, it left Lizzie truly alone, severed from the last familial tie that might have offered solace. Lizzie attempted to forge a semblance of a normal life. She entertained, though her guests were carefully curated, often from the theater world or those who simply didn't care for Fall River's rigid social conventions. She traveled, finding temporary respite in the anonymity of distant cities. She immersed herself in the arts, attending plays and concerts. but every interaction was colored by her past. Every new acquaintance knew her name, and the unspoken question in their eyes was always the same. She was no longer just Lizzie Borden. She was Lizzie Borden, the axe murderess, forever defined by the horrific events of August 4th, 1892. This enduring stigma, this unforgiving legacy, pursued her relentlessly. The acquittal, rather than clearing her name, had merely shifted the trial from a courtroom to the public square. A trial that would never conclude. The psychological toll must have been immense. To live every day under a cloud of suspicion, to know that millions believed you capable of such unspeakable depravity even after a legal exoneration, would be a crushing burden. She lived the remainder of her life under this unyielding shadow, a figure of fascination and revulsion.
The psychological toll must have been immense. To live every day under a cloud of suspicion, to know that millions believed you capable of such unspeakable depravity, even after a legal exoneration, would be a crushing burden. She lived the remainder of her life under this unyielding shadow, a figure of fascination and revulsion. Lizzie Borden died quietly in Maplecroft in 1927 at the age of 66 from pneumonia. Her death, like her life, was tinged with the morbid curiosity that had surrounded her for decades. She was buried beside her parents and sister in the family plot, the only true resolution to her story being that she was now beyond the reach of public condemnation. The immediate legacy of her acquittal was profound. It ignited a national debate on the efficacy of the justice system, the power of circumstantial evidence, and the biases inherent in an all-male jury reluctant to convict a woman of such a brutal crime. It solidified the notion that a verdict of not guilty did not always equate to innocence in the eyes of the public. More importantly, it ensured that the Borden murders would remain one of America's most famous and enduring cold cases. Lizzie Borden, the woman, may have been acquitted, but Lizzie Borden, the legend, the enigma, was condemned to an eternity of unanswered questions, her name forever synonymous with an axe and a mystery that still haunts the annals of true crime to this very day.
And so, after over a century, the legend endures. The brutal murders of Andrew and Abby Borden on that sweltering August morning of 1892 remain etched into American lore, a chilling nursery rhyme whispered through generations. Lizzie Borden took an axe, or did she? The jury acquitted her, but public opinion has never truly rendered a final verdict. Her name is forever intertwined with that infamous hatchet, a specter of suspicion that refuses to fade. This isn't just a cold case, it's a cultural touchstone. We crave closure, a neat resolution, especially when confronted with such primal violence within the sanctity of home. But Lizzie Borden denies us that comfort. She offers no confession, no definitive proof, only a perpetual, agonizing question mark. Was she a victim of circumstantial evidence, or a cunning, ruthless killer who slipped through justice's fingers? The grave holds her secrets, yet the axe's echo reverberates louder than any spoken truth. The Borden house, now a macabre bed and breakfast, stands as a monument to this enduring enigma, a testament to our insatiable hunger for the dark corners of the human psyche. What do you believe happened in Fall River? Was Lizzie truly innocent, or one of history's most successful murderers? Share your theories in the comments below. Let's dissect this mystery together. And if you're as captivated by the unsolved as we are, hit that like button, subscribe to Crime Vault USA, and ring the notification bell. We dive deep into America's untold past, ensuring the echo of these historical cold cases continues to challenge our understanding of justice, truth, and the darkest depths of human nature. Until next time, stay vigilant, and remember, some stories refuse to be forgotten.